Adventure Bureau would like to welcome everyone to the annual Center Film Festival. We wish that in-person events would have been possible this year, but we want to thank you for joining us in this virtual event. We hope to welcome everyone to Happy Valley, Pennsylvania very soon. From the Happy Valley Adventure Bureau and happyvalley.com, we hope you enjoy the 2020 Center Film Festival.
Welcome back, everyone, to the live Q&A section of our Center Film Festival. This is only our second year running. We have an amazing lineup, an incredibly talented group of filmmakers, actors, students, professionals, and an academic teacher, scholar who's going to help us today understand the two films you just watched for Into the Classroom. One film is Come, which is directed by Lizette Barrera and produced by Matt Herbertz, who I have to confess was my student at Ohio University, and look at him making these amazing works. So that fits into the classroom, doesn't it? And I'm so, I don't want to say I'm proud, it has nothing to do with me, but it is very inspiring to see Matt's work over the course of the last 6 years, more years. He teaches in Florida. You're going to tell us a little more about where you teach. Hanan and I, we figured out the other day, we go way back to a film festival, Jewish film festival, he'll tell you where, with his first film, which was an animation, and mine, which was about a couch. So we met there, and here he is making this incredibly impactful film called About a Teacher. I'm very excited for both you and Matt to meet. I'm also extremely excited for you to meet Uju Anya. Dr. Anya teaches here in the College of Education. She's an award-winning scholar who researches questions of class, race, interconnectivity, status. How do we teach? How do we take ownership of what we're doing with the next generation? Both of these films speak right to it. This is her first film festival, but that's what we like to do. We like to bring in people that may not ordinarily think they belong at a film festival and start the conversation. We have Peter Ezzard here, who's a teacher who agreed to be in the film. We're going to hear more about that. I think that's testament to the work done as a director. Tibor Feldman is someone I have worked with, I don't even know how long ago, an incredible, incredible actor. And you've seen him in a number of films. You could do the research. And so again, that's a big testament to Hanan and his script and the fact that he was able to get Tibor Feldman. And speaking of which, I would say the same for Leslie Hendrix, who we have here today, also an accomplished artist and actor. And we love the fact that you're here with us today. And then we have students that have worked, I think, directly with you, Hanan. You'll tell us more about that later. Chris and Brianna, thanks for being here for us. This should be a very engaging conversation. Sorry to throw you right in there, Uju, but I think you got this. Without further ado, Dr. Anya, would you set us up a little bit with what it was like after you've watched the film, and how does it fit into some of the perspectives that you're starting to see grow in the artist / education / agency and taking responsibility for a future perspective?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to be a part of this. And thank you very much to the artists that we have here, the creators, for making such a tremendous piece of work, of cinematic art, both in Come and also in About a Teacher. I'd like to say that it touched me personally as someone who does research on minoritized and marginalized identities, especially of students in our educational systems and institutions. And it also touched me as an individual, as a teacher myself, as someone who's gone through this journey, both as a student and as an instructor, and now in a college of education, in teacher preparation, as a teacher of teachers. So thank you very much for these strong testaments of the work that you're doing and what's out here. I'm also excited, truly excited, about how both your films fit the national moment, the international moment that we're having right now, in terms of paying much closer attention to those who are basically disadvantaged and suffering tremendous oppression. However, not in this paying attention to them in the sense of, oh, finally we get to tell your story, but in the sense of we now have an opportunity to actually be real about this notion of inclusion, of representation, and to make it meaningful for all. And I'm really, really excited the work that you're doing in this this important and critical moment and your contribution to it. I want to thank you specifically, Lizette and Hanan, for this art that you've promoted, that you've produced. It's really provoked my interest, my intrigue, my personal identification, and it's inspired me. And also, I'd like to thank the actors that were in the films, right? The brilliant performances of, that really showed critical developments in not just the characters, but in the stories, stories that we typically see in sometimes really careless ways, even abusive ways, but you have done this work so thoughtfully in the performances and also in the directing and the producing that happened to make it all come alive. I'd like to ask you, first of all, could you give us an overview of both your films so we can sort of understand, if you haven't seen it, what we're talking about? And then I'd like to talk to you both, our directors and our producers as well, about your personal stories and how it brought this all to be.
Lizette, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, so I directed Come, written by Pam Rodriguez, produced by Matt Herbertz. And basically the story is about a little girl who has come recently from Puerto Rico and goes to school in Florida, to Lakeland, Florida, and brings this dessert, Puerto Rican dessert dish called arroz con dulce. And she brings it to school for a Thanksgiving event, and no one eats it. So it's just kind of this beginning of her awakening, of her being a little bit different compared to the rest of her pupils inside the classroom.
Thank you very much for that. Hanan?
Yeah, first I want to say I'm so grateful to be here. This is just amazing. When Pearl contacted me and asked if I would send the film, I was just so touched, and thank you for having this Q&A. And I also want to congratulate Lizette and Matt, because I watched the film and I loved it. I thought it was really personal, Come, and really well acted and produced, and it really moved me. So my film is my first feature film. It's called About a Teacher. And I've been a public high school teacher. I'm entering now my 12th year. And in my first year, I almost quit. And I'd never failed at any job before, but this particular job of public high school teaching in New York was the hardest thing I'd ever done in my entire life. And I sincerely mean that. I entered the profession when I was 39, and I was already experienced and accomplished, and I really thought I knew everything about everything. And I'd never fallen on my face so many times. And I was really willing to flee in the first year. And now I've been a teacher for a much longer time, and I found out that nearly half of New York City teachers leave within their first 5 years. And I decided I wanted to show what teaching is really like compared to these kind of Hollywood movies that I saw on TV, where somebody comes in and teaches kids karate and all of a sudden everyone succeeds in a year. I wanted to show a truthful perspective. So I basically told the story of my first 3 years. And the response has been amazing, in part because I used my former students, 2 of them who were here, to help act, and also had a phenomenal cast in Leslie Hendrix playing the assistant principal, and Tibor playing my dad. And I tried to make it as truthful as possible. And Peter Ezzard is actually a teacher who I taught with. Peter now retired, but he actually came back and acted as one of the teachers in my movie, as well as many other teachers. So I tried to make it as authentic as possible. And thank you again, Dr. Anya, for having us.
Thank you so much for that account. Hanan, your story is more about the teacher, and Lizette, yours is squarely focused on the student experience. Can you talk more about your background and what inspired you to take on that particular perspective in the story?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was approached by Matt Herbertz, who we had a mutual connection through a friend named Shelby, and I was just very privileged enough to just take on an interview, basically my own form of audition to direct this piece written by Pam. And I think when I first read the script, I found it so compelling because I myself, even though I'm Mexican American, not Puerto Rican, there were still so many similarities that, in terms of my background, that I had to deal with as a little girl. I was born in California, but then transplanted to Texas, and that's where I'm currently residing in. And I think one of the first things of me going to school, especially with my dad being more involved around that time in Texas, was that I used to call my dad Papi, and then I also used to bring in also like feel like I was always smelling of canola oil to school. And I think like when I read Pam's story, I was like, yes, like totally. I just identified with it because I felt like I'd been in those experiences so many times as a little girl, and even in high school. Like, I mean, this was something that I felt like I had to grow into, like learning to be different and learning to be okay to be different, because as just a Mexican American in Texas, I never really fit in sometimes with the Mexican kids, or never really fit in with, you know, completely like I don't know, just any other groups. And so in some ways, I think with Pam's story, I felt so I connected a lot, you know, and so I just felt very privileged in how, you know, me being part of the project with Matt and Pam allowing me to help tell the story. And I just, you know, I hope that other people as well who see it could have also connected with it and the experiences that I also too went through, like Pam. And thank you also too for having us here as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I wanted to draw in the actors and to ask you to talk a little bit more about your role and your participation, and also how that engaged and perhaps touched you, maybe allowed you to think more expansively about the particular issues that were portrayed in the film, or what kind of connections were you making? We can start with you, Leslie.
There we go. I'm still technically challenged and will probably remain so for quite some time. You know, I'll tell you, I have friends who are teachers, and all I would ever hear would be, I love my kids, I love the students, this is what happened today, and all that stuff. And they kept the thornier aspects of being a teacher kind of to themselves. And it wasn't until I read the script and then got into this role that I saw, my gosh, besides the fact of having the huge responsibility of teaching our children, the number of hoops that they have to jump through, and the hoops are constantly morphing, they're changing. And the bar gets raised and low, and here, oh, here's a new rule, and here's another. There are all of these things that they have to fulfill for the school system, for the bureaucracy of the school system. That takes up so much of their time, teaching overcrowded classrooms and having all of this other. It just blew my mind. It was a real eye-opener, I must say. And my respect for teachers, which had already been pretty high, just went, wow. We give them an impossible job. anyway, it was really an eye opener, and it's for me anyway that I thought, now, how would I be if I were in this situation where I have been a teacher and yet I'm the one up here having to say, you got to do this, 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 knowing full well how difficult that will be, how impossible these extra tasks are to be asking. And yet being in the position where I have to fulfill this. You have to do this, or my job is imperiled and yours will be imperiled. Anyway, it's an impossible job that I am amazed. My respect and my admiration is huge.
Thank you very much for that, Leslie. I was also touched by your role in that it was easy to position you as a villain, right? In a very kind of simplified way, because you were there, really seeming to be unfair and too taxing. But your role was much more complex than that. And I was very touched to see how well you brought out that complexity. And it's a great credit to your craft. Tibor, I also wanted to talk to you about your character and your participation in the role and understanding in the development that you contributed to in Mr. Harchol's sort of backstory. Could you tell us more about your understanding of your role and participation?
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank you very much for this format and congratulate Hanan and the actors in this marvelous film. It really came about, and I want to talk about the independent film world, as both Pearl Gluck and Hanan Harchol and Liz is part of that. When Hanan first approached me, and it was through Peter, who is a partner of mine in a summer community we're part of, and I was really, I'm just so taken aback and encouraged by independent filmmakers. And Hanan was open to suggestions about casting. He was open to suggestion about investment, open to suggestion about being true to his dream, and no matter what it costs, and his risk in doing that. I didn't know what the film was about. We talked about his relationship to his father, which was really hardcore, sort of an Israeli man. You could do anything, a macho guy, and also had high expectation. I didn't know very much about Hanan's real dad. And we actually shot all my scenes in one day, and it flowed rather quickly and easily, and that's because of Dove, who was the character, was fabulous. But the impact of the film was when I saw the film. I can't tell you. I did not go to public school. I have no idea what it was, and the word authentic for me, as a moviegoer, as a father who sent his kids to class in public schools but never was in the class, I was very impressed. What a tough job. What an enormous influence teachers are. I've spoken to Peter about it, and Peter told me a story about some kid, a human being, come over and says, and hugged him and says, "You were such an influence on my life." And this is both for good and for negative. And I think this story of the personal journey that Hanan and all of us in any industry go through, with the the canvas being limited by the rules or by fellow teachers, and also being expanded by it. I think he really captured that, but more to the spirit of Hanan himself. And of course, I didn't know about the awards and the students that went on, and the true interplay between professionals. It was a real effort, and you know, it's not just a film. It's not just something that you got paid for and you forgot about it, but it was a real experience. And for me, the real experience was more in seeing the film and realizing how much involvement, how much he's invested, how much it's possible to make a dream come true. And you don't have to use guile, and you don't have to be unfair, and you don't have to be a wheeler dealer. I'm really impressed by the whole film and everyone involved in it. Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to also talk to Chris, being a part of the film, but also a part of the real life of the film, right? The backstory. I wanted to talk to you about the investment that you had, not just in your work in the film, but also in making sure that the story was maintained and there was no injustice done to the people who were part of, whose lives made this film. Can you talk more about this investment that you had and also the work in the film?
Okay, there we go. Sorry. Mr. Harchol was a great teacher, and I felt that it was a wonderful experience being part of the film and having that story told truthfully and to reality as best as possible. It in terms of I'm so sorry.
How did it feel to be an actor working, right? Play acting, right? At the same time, making sure that the story was told meaningfully and kind of representative in the way that things happen. So you had like a double investment, like in doing your work as an actor, but also making sure that this was, you know, keeping it real.
Oh, it was a really great experience. I have never acted previously before that. So to actually be on set and be a part of the film was very exciting. And to actually see what it was like to actually be on a set was a very great experience. And I was very grateful to be part of all of that.
I'm really excited for you. I think
I want to add, if I can, Christian, what was the year you graduated? Because you graduated relatively recently, right? Was it 2017?
2018.
2018. So Christian just graduated. He's one of my later students. So he's in film school right now at SUNY Purchase in a great program. He's one of my most talented filmmaker students ever.
That's so inspiring to hear. And Peter, you were also there as an actor, but also as, you know, someone who was involved in the real story. Could you talk about those perspectives?
Okay. So I thought that Hanan was able to capture the frustration that teachers go through on a day-to-day basis and some of the things they do to let off steam. Since I'm a math teacher, I'll give you some statistics that go along with that 50% of teachers leave. I retired after 28 and a half years, and during that time I had 9 principals. So every 2-3 years, depending, there was an entire new pedagogical shift in terms of what was emphasized, what wasn't. Not only do we have 9 principals, I stopped counting, especially during certain previous mayoral administrations, but we had something like 10 plus chancellors, which were basically serve as the chief superintendent of the New York City public school system. 6 governors, 5 presidents, and all of those people have their own idea of what is wrong with public education. And at least teaching in an inner city, I don't want to describe art and design as a gritty inner city school, but it is certainly an urban school district. And my kids, my 3 children, all went through the New York City public school system. But you have to know how to navigate it. I'd say that the New York City public school system is the best and the worst in the country at the same time. And sometimes that can happen in the same building, depending upon how your own personal experiences go. Somewhere along the line, I got the impression that politically, we stopped worrying about educating our kids, and the reaction towards public schools from many of our politicians is we don't want to pay money to educate those kids. And that has, that was a frustrating change that I saw as my career went on. Just as another aside, we had 5 changes in the math curriculum specifically in the almost 30 years I was teaching. So not that the math really ever changed, but how you paced it, how, at what age or grade level different students would be exposed to certain mathematical ideas. That kept changing. And after a while, and I think when you see I played the jaded, seasoned vet who had seen it all before. And towards the end of my career, that's where, I don't think I was really acting, maybe channeling some of my frustrations. I always loved the kids. I always would say that my school was filled with bright and interesting people. And then there was the faculty, because it seemed like some of the initiatives that were being pushed down the pike as they became, they seemed to lose a humanity that attracted me to teaching. And I think that teachers strive every single day to somehow keep in their classroom, because that is ultimately the best thing that we can model for our students. Because, quite frankly, most of our students, will forget most of the things that we taught them unless they need it, and hopefully it'll be there for them to recall. So that's my general impression. But I thought that Hanan's film did an excellent job of, capturing how a new teacher tries to balance out all of the demands on both his colleagues and his peers and the demands that the students make. And it's a difficult job. If society expects supermen or superwomen to do it, we will never fix the problem. It takes serious people to do serious work. And if that's going on, things will hopefully work out for the kids.
Thank you very much for that, Peter. If anything, during this pandemic, a lot of people have found out by personal experience how complicated it is to do the work that you do in the classroom, since, especially as parents, a lot of people have had to take a more active role in their children's education with remote learning. I wanted to bring in Brianna now that you're here with us. And also, I wanted to ask you about your experiences in the film as somebody who was also in the classroom with Mr. Harchol and then playing in About a Teacher.
Well, Mr. Harchol's class is definitely super interesting. I think he does a really good job at, teaching as much about like film in the real world. Especially, I noticed that now that I'm older and I do film in college, and I feel like I'm relearning a lot of the things that Mr. Harchol taught us. Which is fun. But I do notice that his class is very advanced. Being in the film, and being, I guess, in the classroom that was a little wild. I definitely have been there in real life, which was very interesting. So it brought back memories. But, you know, Mr. Harchol really is a great teacher. Overall, not just in film, but just overall, he really just does genuinely care about his students. And so I thought that the film did a really good job at showing that.
Brianna, thank you for that. I wanted to also ask you, what career trajectory did your participation in Mr. Harchol's class put you on? Now, I mean, what does your future jobs or interests or career mean now after this experience with him?
Well, I'll be honest, before being in Mr. Harchol's class, I didn't even know what film was. I didn't even have any plans on doing film at all. It was just, you know, we had to pick a major, and that to me was the most interesting major. And then just being in the class and being there year after year and learning more and more, I realized how much I actually really, really enjoy the process of like creating film and creating content in general. And I would have never done film had it not been for Mr. Harchol or like being in his class at all. I wouldn't know anything about film at all. So I guess I have Mr. Harchol to thank, because I still do film to this day. I go to school for film. And I still love it. And, you know, again, like a lot of the things that Mr. Harchol taught us in his class, and a lot of the things that the little like tips and tricks that he taught us when it comes to editing and filming and just aesthetics in general in film, I still use. And a lot of my professors are always like asking questions, and they're always like congratulating me or just, you know, giving me pats on the back. And I really think I have Mr. Harchol to thank for that.
That's fantastic. I'm sure you feel so happy to hear that, Hanan. I didn't want to leave behind. Oh,
I just wanted to say that it's very, thank you, Brianna, and thank you, Christian. But I want to say that they were students of mine after I kind of learned how to be a better teacher. And the movie really is about the first 3 years. And in the first 3 years, I was drowning. And I if I could just add, I got an email from a student 4 years after I started teaching. So back in 2013, and it's very short. The email, the subject line is "fuck your shit." And it says, listen, it's anonymous. Listen, I was a student of yours briefly back in 2009. You pissed me off so much. I've held a grudge this fucking long, clown. Fuck you and your shit, bitch. So I wanted to say that Brianna and Christian have benefited from the years of teaching experience that I got. And in the beginning, I really, I think I pissed a lot of people off and really didn't know what I was doing. And I was trying in the movie really not to show some heroic character who comes in and saves the day, but actually show how difficult it is. So Brianna and Christian, luckily, did not have to deal with the inexperience that I had way in the beginning. But thank you for those kind words, Brianna and Christian. I know that he's in the wings right now listening. So, but sorry.
I appreciate your honesty, both in the film and also in not painting too rosy a picture of your development in your career. Matt, I wanted to bring you in and also pivot back to Kome and ask about your role in the film and your personal story coming into it and your career as well. And I also wanted to ask both you and Lizette about the political moment. If you can address, we've been having a pretty tense previous 4 to 5 years politically, especially with regard to national sentiments related to especially our Latinx populations. And I wanted to talk to you about that, Matt, after you sort of give us an introduction about your role in the film.
Yeah, thank you so much, and just to echo everyone else, thanks for having us, and love to be with all these extremely talented filmmakers and actors. So I am assistant professor of film and the program director for the film major at Florida Southern College. And probably in my second year, I was teaching a screenwriting course. And as an educator, I've been in higher education for 6 years now, which is kind of weird to think about. In the screenwriting course, we had students from all different majors. This was actually before the film major became a thing. I kind of built the curriculum down here at Florida Southern, and we're in our second year of the major. But Pamela Rodriguez was a student who was in advertising and public relations, but really wanted to take me as a professor. We had known each other at the local coffee shop. And she really took it. She was an amazing student, and she's an amazing person. And one of my big mottos as a film professor is to write something personal, specific, and simple, especially for short films, because of that limited amount of time that we had to communicate our ideas. And moving into her final film, she wanted to talk about her own personal experiences of what it was like to go to school, specifically here in Lakeland, Florida, which is in between Tampa and Orlando. And she wrote this beautiful film, which was Come. And and I apologize for my dog deciding to drink right in the middle of this, but she wrote this beautiful film, and I read a few drafts. We worked together, and I knew it had to get made. There was something so beautiful and simple that spoke so much about her own personal journey that was so universal to so many people in the world, and that go through this idea of like confronting and having this like awakening with their own culture. And so I knew it needed to get made, and I had the means and connections in the area to kind of get it produced, get a grant. But it was also something that was very important. I'm a big proponent of the step aside movement. I wasn't going to be making the film or directing the film. Pamela wasn't comfortable to do that. So that's where I was on a search to kind of find a filmmaker who I thought could relate to the story. And through Shelby, who's went to school with Lizette, I was able to talk to Lizette and find her, and she brought her voice and her personal experience into the film and really took the ground running. So it was amazing as a teacher to see someone who has wrote their first screenplay ever, and then see that get made. So that's kind of my background on that film. So it's been a really wonderful experience. I executive produced, and I was the cinematographer as well for it. So it was a beautiful thing. And then I guess to transition to the next question, I'm someone who, especially within our college, of course we have, the program I wanted to build is, of course, we have the tools that students need in order to like create work that's, looks beautiful. But anyone today with an iPhone can make something look beautiful. And so for me, I'm not really interested in that. I'm more interested in the stories that students are telling. Our program is really small. We admit about 10 to 12 students every year, and we're focused on them talking about basically bringing unique and diverse stories to the world that aren't seen as often. And so for me, it's super important, especially with you're talking about the climate right now with race relations across the Latinx community, but also all minority communities right now. And that's been going on for years. And not really seeing these stories told in an appropriate way, I guess, in a way that's authentic to their identity that I can't speak from, right? I can help get something made. So again, sort of circle back to that step aside movement is someone like me who's a cis white guy. I'm not going to be telling that story, and I want to do what I can to sort of be there next to people to promote those stories.
Thanks. Lizette, I wanted to ask you as well about this, political moment and these realities the past few years that we've been having. and also ask you about, the work that you did to challenge, to tell a counter narrative, actually, right? To challenge sort of the dominant oversimplification, stereotyping, and erasure, right, that these children typically have in our popular media and cultures, the more dominant ones. Can you talk more about that?
Absolutely. I think with right now, we are on this onward continuing movement to try to get our voices out, especially in Hollywood. Like a recent letter that just came out led by some Latinxes, like Tania Sarracho, who just did, this open letter to Hollywood about inclusivity, especially for Latinx voices. We are such a diverse population, even within the Latinx community. It's not all Latinx, it's Latinos, Latinas, and how people will depend how they want to describe themselves, but I think at the end of the day, it's this idea that, we at some point are also too just tired of seeing the same type of narratives. I want to get to a point where I'm like tired of seeing our own narratives too, the same kind of stories. But at this point, my biggest push in any storytelling is to tell the nuance of all these stories that normally don't get heard, right? Before Come, I've tried to champion more Tejano voices, especially living in Texas as an honorary Texan per se, but really trying to foster these different dynamics that we go through every day, that necessarily, we are Latinos, happen to have brown skin, happen to have light skin, all these different colors of ourselves, in settings that don't necessarily have to deal with gangsters, right? And luckily we have pushed past that, but there's still, I think, in terms of budgeting, when we talk about Nuestro Little Budget to higher budgets like in Hollywood over 2 million, those stories are still continuously being so stories of Latinxes and Latinos who are in the same type of form, right? Like Tania Saracho says, she early on, she was always auditioning for the Maria roles, right? And that's all we were, Marias. And at some point, we just want to expand that. Hey, we're also people who, through living in different places, we begin to assimilate, we begin to lose some culture, right? That's humanity, right? Through borders crossing in and out. But I think also within those challenges of this diasporic kind of, of us being people here in the States who have come from different places, like my mother who came from Mexico to California, right? Things are going to be exchanged, things are going to be shared, things are going to be lost anytime we're in the mix of it. And I think with Come, I think that's that beginning of, in some ways, it's sad in some ways too, because at some point she will lose a lot, what she would have experienced back in Puerto Rico, right? And then there's new things she's gaining there in Florida. But there's also things that she's also sharing herself with other people too, right? So this is an interesting ambiguity, I guess, of cultures and exchange. And I think where we're at right now in political climate, I feel like part of my movement is to know that it's so complex, and it's not this is a one thing that defines us, right? But there's all these different voices and all these beautiful voices that are out there, and I think to me that's what I hope to expand, and and again feel very privileged to have been be able to tell Pam's story with this, and with Matt too, being able to to facilitate that as well, and be our cinematographer, executive producer, and in that, and really help that with that.
That was really personally touching. Thank you, Lizette, to hear that. As that brought to mind Lupe Ontiveros. I remember talked about how throughout her career she played a maid. How many times, because this was such a limitation in the imaginary of Hollywood in looking at Latina women, and I'm really thrilled and encouraged about your strength and the inroads that you're making with your career and also in the business to expand this limitedness, right, of how the population, very complex identities are portrayed. Hanan, I wanted to get back to you teacher movies are a pretty common sort of genre, if you will, in American films, and they usually follow the tired and exhausting, like Lizette talked about being tired of the same old stories, and that same old story of the white savior, the mighty whitey trope. It comes part parcel with teacher movies. I wanted to talk to you about how your film ate into that a little bit and perhaps tried to challenge the white saviorism that usually comes with typical teacher movies.
Yeah, I almost didn't make the movie because I started then reading books, in particular by one professor. His name is escaping me right now, but he teaches at Columbia Teachers College, and he wrote specifically about the white male savior syndrome and this whole idea of white teachers coming in, and he even wrote in his book about how African American teachers then end up trying to act in a way that's kind of dictated by white people, and then I started researching more into it, and I was like, oh my God, I don't want to go into this trope, and the way that I fought it, first of all, I can't change that I'm white. So I can't change the reality that I did go into a mostly diverse school and that I am white. What I felt was unique, and what I really tried to emphasize is what a bad job I did. How much I didn't know. I knew about the technical parts of filmmaking and editing, so I knew about maybe the craft, but I had no idea what it meant to connect with kids and really hear them. And I really emphasize that in order to not come across as the white male savior. As a matter of fact, I want to add that, I over the years, I've gotten much, 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 much more from my kids than I've given to them. So this is, one of these wonderful things is that, and this is why I made the movie, is that the idea that I almost left and wouldn't have stayed was terrible, because I think I grew so much as a person. I learned so much about how to listen and hear and see people, and the responsibility that we have to our world and society. And also, when I think about kind of the stories that I was telling as a teenager, you saw in the end of the movie, the pitches that the kids were coming up with. Those were actual pitches that the kids came up with. I got their permission to use their actual pitches in my movie. The pitches and the movies and the voices that these kids have that I'm teaching, so rich, so incredible. I really I wanted to fight that white male savior trope, and luckily some of the reviewers actually said that my movie succeeded in that. That it went against that, kind of trope. So I hope I accomplished it.
I definitely saw that you were making a huge effort in not falling into that easy trap. And I also was touched by your rejection of a deficit orientation or a deficit view of the students. Both the films rejected this notion that these students can be defined by problems, as opposed to looked at as the richness and the resources and the tremendous wealth that they have in people, in culture, and also in knowledge as well. And that was what I felt that both of these films communicated. And I'd like to pass the word along to Pearl, who will take us back to the communication aspect or the festival aspect of our discussion here.
Oh, no, I think you're not off the hook yet, Dr. Anya. I was just thinking it might be really nice to, I don't know if people understand how this bizarre virtual space works. We just discovered it in the last 24 to 48 hours. We can only have 10 people in a room at a time. So we've got Christian on hold. Brianna's coming in, so we're just going to keep like shuffling people through. We'd love to hear from everyone, though. One of the things I'd like all of you to talk about, so we'll start with you, Uju. If you could talk a little about what you want from filmmakers. What can we do as artists to speak to what you're seeing happening? You know, whether or not these films do it, I think we've covered. These conversations have been incredible, and why people were engaged in the projects in the first place, why they've bothered to do it, why they were inspired to do it, you know, how Hanan specifically was inspiring for his students. But, you know, we're continuing to go out there, like Brianna's making work, you know, Matt's making more work, Lizette's making more work, Tibor, Leslie, they're taking on roles. We'll come to them again. And Hanan, you know, even myself as a filmmaker, you know, and a lot of us are educators. You know, as you see the emerging trends and also who you're educating in your classrooms, what do you want to see from us as artists and creators?
Thank you for that question. I believe I want to see more of what Lizette is doing and what she represents, for example, right? Which is leadership behind the scenes. In telling the stories, and leadership of, you know, Black, Indigenous, and people of color telling their own stories, and having it take a prominent position. So not having their voice be interpreted through somebody's vision or somebody's idea of what their story should be, and then only serving in sort of the exhibition of it, and not the conceptualization and the actual work of bringing it out there with the tremendous support that filmmakers or behind the scene people typically do. So I would like much more of that. I would like much more Black women's voices in leadership and in production and greenlighting films, and also in, you know, not just in front of the camera, although we need more of that. And another thing that I would also like is a real interrogation and rejection of the colorism that has gripped Hollywood for a really long time, in that it seems frightening almost to put especially women who are darker skinned in positions of prominence, both in front of the camera and behind. So, and that ties very intimately with the desire to see people tell stories that are also our stories. So those are sort of off the top of my head, what's kind of getting me recently about the industry and what I'd like more to see.
Yeah, and if anything comes to mind as we keep talking, please share. And along those same lines, Leslie, you know, you've been in the industry for a while. We've seen you, is it on Law and Order that we've seen you in a recurring role, and you know, you're coming to a point, and I want to hear a little bit about what kind of roles you'd like to sink your teeth into in terms of possibly this conversation, or just maybe what Uju has just brought up in terms of intergenerational, intercultural, inter-experiences. Like, what kind of roles would you say, you know what, I don't care what the budget is, I'm in, or what kind of roles would you like to see written in general, maybe not necessarily for you?
Oh, golly. Certainly much more, I hate to sound like a broken record, but more films by women. You know, it's look, it's interesting. As an actor, work is work. You do your work.
Absolutely.
You're glad for the work. Yeah. And quite often you don't get to choose about, you know, well, this rubs me the wrong way, or I wish this was more. What I would love to see would be more roles of depth and character for women, stories written by women, about women. you know, it's interesting. Once, as a woman, once I hit a certain age, then I start looking around, going, well, shoot, where are all the stories about the broads my age? What's going on? I'm not the only one. So, but I have listen, I must say, there are changes that are happening. It is unstoppable. Okay, on so many levels. This industry, it will look different. It will look different.
Hallelujah. Let's hope
Glory,
so.
hallelujah.
You're right. I'm beginning to see a little bit of shift, at
Yeah.
least in terms of the ageism, as you're talking about, specifically to women, and to have, you know, older women's roles, for lack of a better term. One of my students called me an older woman and asked if I would be in their film as an older woman. I'm like, no, and not because I'm older, which I am, but you won't see me in front of the camera. This entire virtual experience this whole weekend has been really hard on me because I'm in all time. But I love what you said, and I think it is true that, you know, it's very hard to write depth. We're going to hear from the filmmakers a little more about that. Certainly in About a Teacher in Kome, that was present, where the vulnerabilities are there, and we're allowed to see the edges and the cracks and the fringes, and understand the struggles that we have to get to where we got to go. And, you know, make us consider what are some innovative ways that we can use the arts to ask some really important questions. And I so appreciate the work from this. And I mean, I think what we're seeing here tonight is, you know, what the work is, which is a collaboration. It's people like Uju's work, you know, the actors' contributions, the decision to mix, you know, fiction and nonfiction. Like, that is brave on the part of Brianna and Chris to be in it. And Peter, who was with us earlier, brave for Hanan to not only show his own shortcomings, but also, like, you know, work with non-actors and just go there. And, you know, I feel like, you know, I'm going to want to hear a little more from all the filmmakers about how this fits into your oeuvre, but I feel like, you know, we change when we watch films like this. Tibor, I want to ask you the same question that I asked Leslie. You know, what would you like to see as you're continuing in your career? And I know you've always taken on really roles that aren't necessarily mainstream. You've always taken risks in the indie world, you know, in New York and so on. And obviously you've been in Hollywood films too. Talk to us about what you would like to see more of from the artists that are creating these days.
I agree with Leslie. You know, work is work, and we are not the ones that have the choice in the matter of what we are cast in, and our voices are just do the job. But I think, as Matt said, because of technology, because you can create a film with anything, you know, with the iPhone. My son, who's a young filmmaker, did an animation film, never met anybody, never met the producers, and he produced the whole thing, and it's on no budget. Matt hit the point. It's the storytellers. You know, I can only go back to Pearl, what we did, where you told about the story of the Shomrim. You told a small part of a Hasidic community, which I knew nothing about. And during that time, you explained to me what this garb means and what that means and who's the hierarchy, all the clues of this. And as Lizette had the story of being identifying with the young lady who brought in her mother's favorite pie, or if I would say someone brought in some chont, or somebody brought in, you know, a pig's ears, you know, something that was their favorite food, and is completely misunderstood and not appreciated. And these are stories that are you're capable of saying it. So whether Hollywood will hold on to it or not, I think COVID, I think Zoom, I think this possibility of all that we're going through now gives us a possibility of communicating in a completely different way. And it's an opportunity. It doesn't necessarily, you know, I mean, I mean, Hanan, you know, that you know, when I saw your film, one of the things that I, you know, you were a first-time director working with actors, telling your story. How do you not make it the white savior or the too humble guy or however you go working, you know, I mean, this is, you know, a complete new experience for yourself too. And it's kind of weird for me to see in the end, there was a humility, you know, and yet you showed all the accolades that your kids put in. And so this wonderful mixed message, you know, of what can be done, and your cast and your crew members that were your students. I mean, it was real experimental theater, movie making. It was guerrilla, and I hope that. And you know what? You can't duplicate that again. You can't go back to that first thing again. It's interesting to see what comes out next. And I was wanting to ask both film directors, how was it working with actors telling a story, and they're not interpreting in the way that you wrote it, and how do you deal with that?
Tibor, I'm so glad you asked if I can quickly add this one, because I want to highlight the star of the film ultimately is Dov Tiefenbach, and he unfortunately I sent him an invite. I didn't hear back from him. I know that he's he's been busy, so but he really we would have hour-long conversations. We would be on set, and then things would stop for several hours, and we would talk. What exactly is going through the teacher's mind, because Dov didn't have that classroom experience. So Dov was really kind of channeling my experience. And those were some of my favorite moments on set, is when I was having these conversations with the actors, because I wanted to tell the story as authentically as I could. And sometimes we would do many takes, and it was also frustrating sometimes. But at the end, Dov really shined. He really managed to tell my story in a beautiful way. But I also did give him a lot of liberty. He changed a lot of lines, many lines, and sometimes there would be debates about changing lines. But ultimately, it had to be a compromise between what my original story was, but also what he felt he could do authentically as an actor to convey the experience. And I think he did a marvelous job. And it's that dance between like the director and the actor that was really challenging, but also incredibly rewarding. I wish Dov were here to be able to say it for himself, but he did a marvelous job. So thank you for pointing that and asking that question, Tibor.
Yeah. Lizette, do you want to address that question that Tibor was asking? Like, what is it like to work with an actor that's not quite, actors are the arbiters of the vision that the director has, and you do all this research, and then you write the script, and you have all your themes and your reasons for throwing your passion and energy into telling a story, and you cast and you believe in these voices, and we're going to get to that with Brianna and Chris as well. And Tibor asks a great question. What happens when the actors just aren't getting it? How do you deal with that? That was a really good question.
Yeah, I think it's very challenging. I mean, especially working with with our film with Come, this was the first time our actor this was her first film, and as a little girl, who had had a lot of adversity already, coming from school, who had been bullied a lot, and she came in from Chicago too, so it was like all these new things are happening, and I think that's one of the few things of like. The hardest thing is, I think we have to always remember that these are human beings, right? And there has to still be that connection between you and your actors, right? There has to be some form of trust, and and again, to allow them to process, these emotions, because at some point, it's not acting, it's reacting, or sometimes it comes a lot more than just reacting. It can feels like it's happening to you as a real person. And so I think that's sometimes the idea of having to blend in and working with so many different actors. Everyone works differently. And I think the important parts of it, or I find like sometimes the rehearsal part, which we didn't get a whole lot of rehearsal, but it was more about just trying to, find the language between us. Like how does, Noah, how is she as a person? How is she, what things flow with her? And I think that's the most first thing, like having to kind of, I think, remember that, from my at least perspective, these aren't just props. Actors aren't props. Actors aren't just, these beings that you place in because it's your vision. No, and that's my perspective is not that. There is a business aspect to it, right? Because of money, and you have to get your job done because there's either a lot of money on the line for projects, but in the time. But I think especially for young actors who are just starting in, with Noah, who I think sometimes we just have to have that patience, and maybe at the very beginning is trying to invest in the patience first, so that later on it can be faster. So yeah.
Great. I think that's a good answer. Let me mute you real quick. Was that because of your feedback? All right, done. Okay, great. Thank you. We'll come back to you for the answer to my previous question. I just wanted to answer Tibor's question. Thank you. Chris, while you were out, Dr. Anya asked Brianna what she was doing now, or we were talking and she had talked about how she's now in film school. What are you up to, Chris? What are you doing right now?
I'm also currently in film school right now. I'm at my 3rd year right now.
Where is that?
SUNY Purchase.
SUNY Purchase. And Brianna, where are you? That's an amazing school. Good for you.
Brooklyn College now.
Perfect. Oh, I love that. I love that you're both in these really terrific programs, and I cannot wait to see what's going to be coming out from both of you. In fact, my last question to both of you is just kind of transitioning to like what you want to see more voices of and how you think you can impact. Is there something you got out of being on set, playing both what might have been from your own experience, but reinterpreted through the director's vision / you then giving him a point of view to help him? And did that help you in some way as a filmmaker? And what are some stories you're telling now? What are you working on?
Well, it definitely gave me a lot of insight. It was, being on set was kind of like my first time being in like a real film set. So I definitely learned a lot, especially, being an actor. It was my first time really acting, like actually having to like actually act. So I give kudos to all the actors because it's not easy. But as far as representation, I think Uju and Leslie hit it right on the nail. I don't really see a lot of films made by people who look like me, who are from where I'm from. And so it does motivate me to continue doing film and to continue telling stories, especially ones that I can relate to,
I know. And I'm so glad you're going to tell those stories. Yes, Chris.
I learned on set that the environment really has like an impact on like your acting, and from not acting at all, being with my peers and classmates had a very comfortable environment to just like make mistakes and like really just like feel comfortable in acting. And I agree with everything that was said about like the diversity in films and what I would want to be seen being represented as a Puerto Rican from the Bronx. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Well, Chris, you'd be happy to know that you have until Monday night, but you can, and of course, if you miss it, just let us know and we'll reach out to the filmmakers. There are about 2 films set in Puerto Rico or deal with Puerto Rico in our film festival. So do dig in, see what's already out there and add to the story. I love that that's what you're doing. Brianna, same. I'm super inspired and I hope you'll come back to us here at the Center Film Festival. I hope you'll bring your work here. We're very eager because I really feel a lot of us around this table here are educators, either through our artistic work as filmmakers, literally professors, researchers, and actors. We're always educating and kind of being arbiters of how a voice or a message gets out. So the more you can inform us, it's like a back and forth situation. Lizette, I wanted to hear from you also about how this film fits into the oeuvre of your work. What are you working on now? I know you've done Moscow, which is available on HBO. You've won numerous awards, and some of them set in Texas, right? Best Female Filmmaker in Texas. And so why don't you talk a teeny bit about maybe we have to wrap up really soon, but I didn't want to skip that over. Like, what is your, how does this fit into your body of work? What are we going to be seeing? What are you working on?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just wrapped up on my first directorial debut for a music video by Destiny Navaira, and she stems from a lineage of Tejano musicians. Her uncle was Emilio Navaira, who was deemed the king of Tejano, and he was there with Selena back in the 90s and 2004 before he died. And so she's on her rise right now as a musician with her and her brother. I used to be an educator as well, so I was one of my previous students. I made that connection, and was able to just rep on that 2 weeks ago, and had a really fast turnaround, and we just released it. So it's the music's called Cruel Realidad, which is like cruel reality, based off the times that we're going through. So we just wrapped up on that. And then right now I'm also I'm working towards my first feature called Chicle, which was based off the short film that I also, we world premiered at South by Southwest and whatnot. And so I just received a grant for that in development. And
congratulations. That's wonderful.
Thank you. And so hopefully next year we'll have at least the first draft. So then hopefully go through another cycle for grants. So yeah.
That's awesome. Well, stay in touch about that too. What do you want to see more of? I know you can't do all of it, Lizette, but what do you want to see more of?
So it's funny. I would love to see actually more stories of like, so there's a couple of things. I just wrapped up on Queen's Gambit. I can never say that word, but I just loved her character, the dynamic between her and her mom. They're very interesting. So I want to see more more stories like that. Right. But also just more fun things like Umbrella Academy was fun. I think there's a Latino character there too that I really liked, and I kind of just want to see us also just beyond also, stories of ourselves, but I also want to see us as well in more in these like. Yeah. Action fun movies too, and so that's also where I would love to see, or even more horror. I think horror would be fun. I'm not a horror writer, but I just think it's a great niche for us too. But I think that's to me. I just want to see more character development, into more research and stories with characters that are Latinx, and BIPOC as well. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, that's actually a really good transition to talking to you, Hanan, because I think one of the things that was really wonderful for me to see with both of these films was the ability, sometimes people say things are on the nose and it's so theme driven and they're not going to get, it's the ability, like Lizette was saying, can you also be entertaining and still have some kind of social impact? And I think both of these films do that. So Hanan, what do you want to see more of? What are you working on? Tell us a little bit about that.
So I have a series of animations that teach Jewish ethics. I grew up very non-observant, but I've been doing a lot of study with rabbis and taking these Jewish ethics and putting them into kind of conversations between a father and a son driving in a car. And I'm doing now my 14th one about conflict resolution. And really, I guess what I'm always looking for, and I always tell my students, is that the one thing that you can do better than anybody else is to tell your story. So I'm really looking for authenticity. I meet so many wonderful, beautiful people, and I think that everybody has something so special inside of them. There's something that Rabbi Nachman says is that everybody, no matter how rotten they are or rotten they think they are, everybody has a light inside of them, and it's our job to focus on that light. And when you focus on that light, it causes that light to grow until eventually the person sees that light in themselves. And I think that that's a summary for what teaching is. And I think that that's also what a summary is for good storytelling, is really to embrace the stories that we have in our lives. They're so rich and they're so wonderful, and they're not cookie cutter. The reason great stories are there is because they embrace those inherent contradictions that are inside each of all of us. So I'm always looking for authenticity.
Yeah. Which fits right into representation. I think that's the two that come together. And Finally, certainly not least, last but not least, Matt, what about your answer to that question? What are you working on now? How did this fit into your body of work? I know your films, or some of them, and they do the same thing as Come does and About a Teacher does, which is to entertain without losing impact. So tell us a little bit about your work and what you're doing now.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so it's a huge goal of mine to you know, my mentor, who was a teacher, Ross Moore, and who's up at Connecticut College right now, and now he's my creative collaborator at Kilted Productions. He also worked as the assistant director on Come as well. But my goal has been to really attempt to create authentic stories that have high impact, and the themes, the ideas, the ideology, the politics of the movie that are going to either subvert what we normally see or challenge the way in which we think about things. A lot of my films are open-ended, ask a lot of questions. And I'm also someone who really is, I hope my research is usually in gender and violence and faith. And so a lot of my films deal with masculinity, but also, you know, trying to kind of create and represent a diverse collection of people that aren't necessarily just me, unless I'm critiquing myself in a way.
I'm sorry, yes, but, that actually fits into the theme of the evening. Matt, where can we see your work? What's your next project?
Yeah, so my next project, I'm actually in pre-production for about 3 short films, and then I'm trying to make My Florida Home, which was my last film that I directed. I'm trying to get that into a feature right now. But 2 films I'm co-writing, one with an Iranian filmmaker out in New Mexico, and another one with Ross Moran also, which is I'm hoping to produce and shoot that film. Also a film I'm writing to get a female director that actually is about masculinity as well. And then I've got, so a bunch of films in the works, everything's just on hold.
It's worth mentioning that I feel encouraged that a lot of you are in the classroom and encouraging the next generation to make work. A good portion of this panel teaches, and in other ways, if not exactly in the classroom. So Tibor and Leslie, look out for work coming your way, scripts from either Matt or Hanan, Lizette, Brianna, or Chris. And we might have inspired Dr. Anya to pick up her to polish off some screenwriting skills. We both happen to be displaced, but loving it, obviously, in the world that we're in here in State College, Pennsylvania. So we may actually just have to do a little writing workshop, Uju, and get some of these stories you want to see on paper. I just want to thank all of you for being here. This was so inspiring, so insightful. I loved all the layers of this conversation. I really appreciate your time tonight, and I hope to see all of you at next year's Center Film Festival. For those who are watching, stay tuned for our next and final live Q&A before our awards ceremony, and this Q&A will be for our closing night film shot right here in Pennsylvania, called Small Time, which also has stellar acting such as Tibor's and Leslie's and Chris's and Brianna's. Thank you all so much for being part of this conversation.